Hello and welcome back, everyone. Happy Thursday on a Friday. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Portugal flavor dev diary, which is rather lengthy, as hinted by its title, where it says this is not a short dev diary. It is indeed not a short dev diary. We have to scroll and we have to buy time while scrolling to talk about how long it is, or talk how long it is in order to buy time just to show how long it is. And of course, we do have Victoria at the helm, and Victoria is going to do two things, right? She's going to warn us that everything is work in progress and is subject to change, and she's going to wish us a happy Thursday with the capitalization of happy, because of course it's a holiday and as such it deserves, capitalization. So let's get into it. Portugal mentioned, I see that we don't have a problem using caps in this. We don't have a problem using caps. This is foreshadowing for, of course, our happy Thursday. Hello and...
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine, and you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Okay, so this is Victoria, narrative design lead of Victoria 3. Naturally, the game is named after her. Today, we will be covering the narrative content for Portugal and a unified Iberia, coming in the update 1.1.2 and Iberian Twilight. Please note, as ever, any screenshots attached are from a work-in-progress build and contain some elements which may not be final. There we go, the good old disclaimer. Free content. Portuguese political setup. In 1836, Portugal finds herself at the end of one conflict and the height of another. The victory of the Liberals in the aptly named Liberals War of 1828 to 34 has opened the way for a new conflict between the factions of the victors. The Carlist party, representing the petite bourgeoisie and the armed forces, stands for modernizing oligarchic liberalism under the constitutional charter of 1836, whilst their progressive opponents desire Portugal's modernization to be carried out under a democratically promulgated constitution here. And so we do have coming in here the Carlist party and the Vintist party, and of course the relegated non-liberals. At the start of the game, Portugal has two unique ideologies. Cartist, did we say Carlist and it's Cartist? We just can't read. Oh, the truther, it's Cartist. And Miguelist. They refer to the two political conflicts that characterize the Portugal at the start of the game. The first to the political conflict that characterized the reign of Maria II, and the second to the aftermath of the still recent liberal wars. The Cartists represent the more conservative side of the Portuguese liberal consensus. They are defined by support of the Portuguese Constitutional Order of 1826, a document granted by King Pedro IV. This document is the law of the land in 1836 and is bitterly opposed by the progressive liberals. The more controversial nature of the charter arose from both its origin as an imposed constitutional issued by royal authority and the oligarchic devourist political system that it fostered. Is that... when the rich eat you. The Cartist ideology replaces the meritocratic ideology for the petite bourgeoisie, the Portuguese petite bourgeoisie, and advocates for an oligarchic political system in a strong centralized state. We do see oligarchy technocracy, which is going to be good for getting that extra slot on the companies. We see appointed bureaucrats and per capita and prop tax being kind of supported ones, which is kind of nice to have that in. I think the PB supported prop tax anyways, or did they not? I think, did they? Or did they just support per capita? I think they might have just supported per capita. I can't recall. The Miguelist ideology, meanwhile, represents the losing side of the liberal wars of 1834. It supports the claim of the deposed king, King Miguel I, advocating for a traditional monarchy and the reversal of the liberal reforms of Pedro IV and Maria II. Miguelism may be considered similar to the Spanish Carlism, there's the Carl, or French legitimism, though it was historically unable to launch any major uprisings before the 34 defeat. And we see Miguelist is going to support monarchy, traditionalism, autocracy, state religion. Kind of normal looking, to be honest, on the side of things, but where are they on? The Miguelists are going to be, who has that ideology? So the Catholic Church rolls it, the Landowners rolled it here, so looks a little bit normal, but I suppose state religion and monarchy aren't normally necessarily supported together. on some of these ideologies. We see it also supporting subjecthood, so this can overwrite some things. And they do endorse oligarchy over some other ones, and so this is kind of significant because landed voting normally, and they oppose landed voting, which is interesting. So if you roll this on a landowner, they won't be indifferent to you going on to landed voting anymore. So do have some stuff going on there. But okay, Portugal begins the game with a somewhat liberal set of laws, an antiquated tax system, and more institutions that her bureaucracy can support. Womp womp. We do have an oligarchy, fine enough, and then we are going to have public schools, charity hospitals, poor laws, yeah, do have a lot of institutions, yep. Her oligarchy law has both the electoral clientelism amendment, discussed in Dev Diary 165, and the Chamber of Gentlemen Deputies, an amendment which represents the elected chamber of the Portuguese devourers. This amendment gives the Portugal a small franchise, political parties, and elections from the start of the game. Okay. Elections with monarchy, oligarchy. Okay. Interesting. So parent law is landed voting, so it's like pseudo-landed voting? Huh. I wonder to what degree you can kind of add, what flexibility you have in adding these types of things, because this might lead to some interesting combinations. And if you have a lot of agency in terms of picking what amendments, if I recall correctly, it is the consequence of events that lets you to pass these. And the question is just how many are we rolling, just how much kind of things can we have going on here, and just what exactly can we cook up. It'll be interesting if there's like a metagame for trying to pass a law, and then you want to roll an amendment, and if you don't roll your amendment, you just cancel the law and try repassing it later, just to get the like BIS version of your law, where you have an amendment. Alright, paid content. Wow, that was quick. I was quick on the free content, eh? But this is, of course, a flavor pack. We are discussing flavor, and here it is. The reign of the devourers. The Portuguese political regime in 1834 to 36 was not a popular one. The efforts of the successive Cartist governments to balance Portugal's crippling debt and budget deficit through the sale of political, public and church lands gained this period the moniker devourismo, referring to the perceived devouring of the Portuguese nation by corrupt politicians. It is, indeed, the case that this period was characterized by grotesque corruption. The sales of public and church lands, more often than not, led to the concentration of land in the hands of liberal oligarchs with minimal acute estate revenue to show for it. We've seen, there's a lot of, like, fire sale type... This is, like, a pattern that is very common throughout history, is when you are trying to liberalize, that or economically or otherwise, that there is intense corruption during times of change, where there is changing hands of government property, whether it is like privatizing industry in the case of like the fall of the Soviet Union and this type of thing, and you see a lot of, and also China's transition to be much more capitalistic followed a very similar pattern where public officials would get the best shake at things, and they were in position and kind of fleeced the nation. And so, not uncommon. And I guess we see it with Portugal. I know less about Portuguese history in the 1800s than some of the more contemporary examples of this. The policies of the period are represented by the Reign of Devourers journal entry. For as long as this journal entry is active, Portugal will be forced to privatize state-owned buildings and will suffer decreased legitimacy as a burden upon her treasury. This isn't the worst. Mathematically, it is the case that you don't want to privatize super early, but like privatizing is not the worst thing that you could have. We do have expenses, and we have minus legitimacy and extra SOL for the upper strata. Not the worst. The legitimacy is probably the most painful part. The journal entry has 4 possible outcomes representing the various permutations of Cartist and constitutionalist victories. It will end in a Cartist victory if the government either manages to pay back Portugal's debt or remains in power whilst to privatizing a sufficient number of government. That's unfortunate. You have to pay back the debt instead of running it up. But I guess if you're not a major power yet, I think, do they start a major power? If you're not a major power yet, it's not the case that you want to run a deficit anyways. The first outcome is more favorable for Carthage and will grant loyalists bonuses for either the ruling government or the public treasury. Promised and delivered. Stand and deliver. How do I reach these Cartists? And so we will have 10% capitalists become loyalists. A little bit of influence, low interest rate. Low interest rate is actually nice because then you can really spin it up. Okay. On the other hand, for how long? Is this a decaying modifier? Doesn't look like it. Okay. So you get to spin it up and you have 10 years to become a GP or you're going to break your bank. On the other hand, the constitutionalist side may triumph either by popular revolt or enacting a non-oligarchy voting law and electing a legitimate government with no Cartists. If the government falls to a liberal revolution, the progressive opposition may be instantly swept into power, a constitution enacted, and the heads of the Cartists sent into exile. And so we do see a bunch of text that says some stuff. We get some loyalists on the armed forces. We will get bloodless revolution. Hey, this looks like when you is this the same type of thing you get when you step down, when you abdicate? Where you get the minus 90% political strength of the other people, and then I guess the Vitnist party getting added while everyone else is removed is a little bit different than the abdication. But this looks strikingly similar to an abdication. If the revolutionary outcome occurs for the remainder of Maria II's reign, the name of the Liberal Party will change to reflect the month in which the revolution occurred, and we see the Julian Party. Beware the Ides of Julian. Just kidding, it's March. We get second liberalism. In addition to the reign of devourers, the Portugal starts with a game with a second liberalism journal entry. Whilst this reign of devourers is designed to quickly end with a tone-setting victory for one side, second liberalism will typically linger for some time. This journal entry serves as a framing device for the period of constitutional monarchy that lasted from the end of the Liberal Wars in 34 to the declaration of the Portuguese Republic in 1910. That is an extended period of time. We see that it ushered in a new era of constitutional rule, what's referred to as the first liberalism. Though Miguel was briefly able to restore absolutism, his defeat in the Liberal Wars and subsequent exile made constitutional rule a fact. Through every level of Portuguese government is now filled with ex-revolutionaries, from the moderate Cartist tendency to progressive radicals. The precise identity of the second liberalism is yet undefined. Will this stabilizing compromises the moderates carry the day, or will the spirit of 1820 roar back to life? Hey, the Roaring Twenties. Okay. So we have some completion requirements here. Bureaucracy is greater than or equal to 0. Fair enough. We have completed something. Our GDP is ranked equal to 8. Not too hard. Has not had a revolution or successful coup for the past 10 years. Maybe harder. No non-marginalized interest group with the Miguelist ideology. No non-marginalized interest group that has a leader with the Miguel. So no one in government. Man. No non-marginalized. I don't like the way this is worded. Right? No non-marginalized has a leader with the Miguelist ideology. Why do we have a... Why do we need a double negative here? No non-marginalized. I guess there... Do we have a word for non-marginalized? I guess we don't. No... in power interest group with the leader with the Miguelist ideology. Yeah, that's so awkward. I don't think there is a word for marginalized, so you have to do the negation. Normally you don't want to roll up a double negative. It's kind of mildly confusing, but I guess that's... There's no terminology for the alternative. This journal entry has 3 possible outcomes representing a victory for the constitutional monarchs, the Republicans, and the Miguelists. To earn a victory as the constitutionalists, one must overcome Portuguese bureaucracy woes by establishing bureaucracy surplus and completing regeneration, retain voting law, avoid coups and revolution, and marginalize the Miguelists. Here we see, and what we will get for this is some strength to kind of the more moderate wing. Makes sense, a little bit of coup resistance, legitimacy based on votes, okay. One may also achieve the historical outcome in which foreign policy failures, increased mismanagement, and overreach by the Portuguese monarchy led to the fall of the monarchy and the establishment of the government. We will see fall of the monarchy giving a malice to attraction. Our fortunate regeneration. regeneration. Just making sure that I'm not accidentally auto-completing. Often I do that when reading these, like my brain just sees the start of the word and just auto-completes it, and it's not actually the word. Shout out to Carlists. So the idea of regeneration held sway over Portuguese liberalism over much of the 19th century. In the eyes of the regeneradores, similar to the loud car outside, like Fontes, Paria de Malo, Ford, the regeneration referred to a political regime in which would stabilize the Portuguese politics, modernize the country, and lay the foundations for future economic development. Its name derives from the 1820 political manifesto of Manuel Borges Canheiro, one of the leaders of the Portuguese Revolution of 1820 and the leading politician of the first liberalism from 1820 to 1823. In his manifesto, he presented a vision of Portugal that was meritocratic, virtuous, transparent, and governed lawfully by a constitutional king and Cortes. Doesn't everyone kind of want this? Yeah, the truth hurts. Okay, an interesting component of the political mindset of the regeneration period was the notion of politics as reducible to transportation. That is interesting. The notion is essentially an adaptation of, speaking of transportation, shout out to the next loud car outside. This notion of essentially adaptation of Canheiro's proposed mode of reform to the era of railway. To quote chapter 9 of his Regenerated Portugal, the great work of our regeneration must proceed with regularity and peace. It is not possible to suddenly put in place the springs of a machine that has become entirely disordered. Nevertheless, your virtues, your civilization, your generosity, of which you have an unprecedented example in the history of the world, fully assure us that everything will be hastened by through your cooperation with the government, and that the spirit of frenzy which has brought so much blood and so many tears to France will not find its way to Portugal. Yep. Everyone's afraid of French protesters. Forget past oppression. Be steadfast in establishing new institutions. Let modernization in all things remain your guiding principle. We know that the civil liberty which was stolen from us will not be confused with license, audacity, or insubordination to laws and authorities. Our fortunate regeneration journal entry will be activated once Portugal reaches nationalism, has a legitimate government comprised of liberal interest groups, and has not had a liberal coup for 10 years. Upon its activation, all the regeneration subjournal entries will be added along with it. And so we see kind of similar to Spain getting their economic kind of journal entry, we get one for Portugal as well. We will have these requirements and adds several of these kind of journal entries, which we are anticipating is kind of just going to give little bonuses if we complete it. While this journal entry is activated, the petite bourgeoisie will gain the regenerator identity, which will orient it towards protectionism and interventionism and against child labor and slavery. That sounds nice. So they do like compulsory primary school, protectionism. I think protectionism is better than free trade anyways. I think it's better than mercantilism. Not 100% sure on that, but the ability to give treaties that have the ban of either tariffs or subventions is nice. We see that they endorse interventionism. Notably, though, laissez-faire isn't super hated. A little bit annoying, perhaps, but laissez-faire cuts you off of monopolies, so there's that too. And then they want slavery banned. Or they don't desire it, but they oppose the presence of slavery. But does this include... Yeah, it does include colonial slavery. Portugal's regeneration may be contested with Spain's. With Spain's regeneration is largely focused around economic development. Portugal's is focused around the development of solid institutions, a strong and centralized state, and public works programs. To represent the difference, Portuguese regeneration has no option to utilize creative accounting and will remain until it is either completed or Portugal either defaults on the debt or falls to a coup, or revolution. Additionally, Portugal is expected to retain a budget surplus for at least half the time the regeneration is active. Retain a budget surplus. God, that sucks so hard. Retain a budget surplus for at least half the time the regeneration. So I guess you want to get it done as quickly as possible, otherwise this will lengthen the time at which you have to do it. Oh... That's not ideal. Like, generally, deficit spending is, like, strong, but okay, we'll complete if you have had a positive balance for more than half the time this journal entry is active, has these taxation methods, and has completed some of these other things. If completed, gets at long last. If the bonuses for at long last are not good, you probably just want to ignore this. The 3 pillars of the generation are transportation, modernization of the countryside, and state institutions. To complete these tasks, one must construct railways throughout the country, ensure that access to the market, research technology is crucial to communications and agricultural mechanization, enact and advance production methods, and strengthen the bureaucracy and the education system. So we see a few of these. So we need, like, improved fertilizer threshing machines, enact homesteading or commercialize agriculture. And okay, triggers the color of progress if completed, which, you know, you complete faster than the loud car outside. We also want electric telegraph, so this is not something you could finish quickly. These look like mostly tier 3 ticks, right? Electric telegraph, I can't remember if it's tier 3 or tier 4, but fertilizer and threshing machines I think are both tier 3. And so, you know, your ability to go commercialized agriculture is tier 3. Of course, you could go homesteading before that. And it might be the case that you just want to complete the sub-journal entries for whatever bonuses they provide, unless the reward for completing the whole shebang is huge. Like, running a positive balance is, like, pretty... It's not ideal. As one completes the portion of the regeneration, one will receive events showcasing the progress one has made. And so we see 1,000 miles, which was, I'm guessing, let's see, was this in any of these? 1,000 miles for the public works here. And so completing this will give us more loyalists, political movement, activism, radicals, etc. Yeah, I don't think this, like... Okay, wow, it's an active night tonight. A successful regeneration is largely its own reward. Nonetheless, successfully completed the regeneration grants increased investor confidence and strong bonuses to the popularity of those who made it possible. So you get some popularity on your guys who can die anyways. And you get decaying for 20 years, 5 legitimacy, and some extra contribution efficiency. Is this worth not deficit spending? Probably not. So, and considering it wants tech that is reasonably late, you have to not deficit spend for an extended period of time. It's probably just not worth doing. I don't know. Maybe I'm underrating the investment pool contribution efficiency, but spinning it up is really valuable. And so... like, intentionally acquire more and more debt. I guess you just, like, have a bigger, like, you get bopped harder if you fail, because you will fail the journal entry, but, like, in terms of min-max type of approach, it's probably just not worth completing. The rewards not as, the threat is, the implementation is the cure is worse than the disease. Alright, African ambitions. Portugal is one of the world's oldest colonizing power. The Portuguese Empire was the first truly global empire and is the longest lasting, historically speaking, from 1415 to 1999. Most notable for our period was the colonization of Angola and Mozambique. Whilst Portuguese presence in these areas has been continuous since the early 16th century onwards, it was the 19th century that the formerly small coastal settlements expanded into vast territories that spanned multiple millions of square kilometers. This colonization of Africa for the purposes of plantation agriculture was a priority of the Portuguese government in the late 19th century onwards, with chartered companies such as the Mozambique Company established for this purpose. Once Portuguese finishes colonizing in any state in Angola or Mozambique, she will receive the Alem Mar Africano journal entry, which will grant claims on the remainder of these territories. Very nice. Don't see too many claims things. So we will get claims. And if we get claims, so most of this, if I recall correctly, most of this is just not conquered, but this prevents other people from colonizing it if we have claims and they do not. So that is pretty nice, and so we can gain control of that. Once one completes the colonization of Angola and Mozambique, one will be able to lay claim to the land between it with the pink map decision. Historically, Portugal's attempt to realize this project in 1890 was hampered by the British rejecting her claims to the Zambezi basin, leading to diplomatic crisis that reduced Portugal's stature on the world stage. This diplomatic humiliation was one of the conditions that set the stage for the fall of the Portuguese monarchy 20 years later. Womp womp. And we see proposed the pink map where we want to get a Zambezi, busy in Zambezi, Zambia, Kazembe. Fair enough. And the pink map decision sends an event to Great Britain requesting Britain to recognize Portugal's claims to the land between Angola and Mozambique. As Britain, one may either allow Portugal to proceed, charge it a fee for doing so, or refuse Portugal's request. As Portugal, if Britain declines one offers, one may proceed regardless at the cost of tremendously decreasing one's relations with Great Britain. Alright, fair enough. The pink map journal entry requires one to successfully colonize all the land between Angola and Mozambique, realizing the historical pink map. Okay. So we have to get some colonization done, and that is the requirement to complete the journal entry. So quite a big chunk here, cutting off Britain from kind of the northern portion, and this... If we have any sort of bonuses, I guess just having claims is a pretty substantive thing to be able to, like, realize this. In some areas, having claims, and so this will be nice if we can complete it. Successfully realizing the ambition will lead to the Portuguese gaining domestic and international acclaim, as well as rewarding the ruler's interest group. And so we will get some prestige, some legitimacy, and some stuff on the interest group. Alright, fair enough. We see Lucifonia. The independence of Brazil is even more recent than the independence of Spain's American colonies. Brazil was briefly in the personal union with with Portugal in 1826, and post-independence relations between Portugal and Brazil were comparatively much better than those between Spain and her former colonies. The opportunities thus ripe for strengthening the economic, diplomatic, and cultural bonds between the two countries. If Portugal declares an interest in Brazil and establishes positive relations, she will receive the Old Empire journal entry. We can support Emperor Pedro, or we can pursue reunification. We'll conclude if has recently expelled diplomats of Brazil. Okay, Brazil has recently expelled diplomats. So as long as you don't piss anyone off, you can keep making progress. The journal entry has two unique interactions. The first is available if one owns Colossus to the south and enables a strong Portugal to assist Brazil in preventing a coup against Emperor Pedro at the cost of Pedro's popularity. The second allows Portugal, that is caught up with Brazil, to seek a restoration of the United Kingdom between the two countries. This is going to be so much fun. And we see that we have to have a GDP greater than Brazil and a prestige higher than Brazil. That's actually not too hard to achieve. I mean, I assume you don't want to just support Pedro, but I guess you can for the RP. On October 30th, 1835, the Brazilian General Assembly promulgated a new law which stated that Queen Maria II had forfeited her Brazilian line of succession. This law formally split the House of Bragança into Brazilian and Portuguese branches. Such a succession was a pressing concern at the time. Were Pedro to die at a young age, Maria II of Portugal would have succeeded the Brazilian throne, restoring the union between the two countries. Under the terms of this law, Prince Januaria Maria would become the designated heir until the emperor was able to produce an heir of his own. It is not particularly plausible that this law would have been revoked. The Brazilian political establishment would see this as a breach of Brazil's sovereignty, and the historical balance of power between the two nations was such that Brazil really had no reason to care what Portugal thought about anything. Nonetheless, for the United Kingdom to be restored, it must be revoked, and so the premise of this journal entry reveals itself. For Portugal to pursue the United Kingdom, she must first eclipse Brazil in prestige and GDP. Once she has done so, one may choose to pursue reunification and so activate the United Kingdom journal entry. All right, fair enough. And then we'll complete Brazil as a personal union under Portugal. Now, to my recollection, there's not a way to eventually annex a personal union, but I guess there could be further journal entries. It will trigger the pluricontinental if completed. And then will fail if Portugal does not have a monarchy. Monarchy has not been enacted in Brazil, and Portugal does not have the Old Empire journal entry. All right, fair enough. And so we have to keep these active. But continuing on, whilst this journal entry is active, Portugal will have access to a new treaty article which requests Brazil to amend her succession law to permit Portuguese candidates to her throne. Very nice scaffolding onto kind of the previous system made for making diplomatic agreements or treaties where we can put in articles, and so we have to give enough to Brazil in order to get the amend this constitution. We see it's cost 50, not too bad, and so getting this should be achievable. If Brazil accepts the treaty, the sitting monarchy of Portugal will become the heir of Brazil. At this point, any male heir produced by Pedro the second would be ahead of the monarch in Portugal in line of succession. However, Pedro the second did not historically produce any surviving male heirs, and so we can safely assume that the Portuguese monarch may keep their place. All right, so a little bit of railroading there. Once the king or queen of Portugal becomes the heir of Brazil, one must wait for Pedro II to die or abdicate. As a republican coup is a serious threat to the ability to succeed the throne, this journal entry will also keep Portugal informed of the situation in Brazil. If succession is threatened, one may use support Emperor Pedro interaction in the Old Empire journal entry, to tilt the balance back in one's favor. So just to keep Pedro on the throne long enough for him to die. Once Pedro dies or abdicates, the ruler of Portugal will succeed the Brazilian throne, and the personal union between the two countries will be restored. Past this point, one simply needs to hold on to it. So here we will get, for 10 years, some prestige and authority, and we will also get, Brazilian will adopt the Lusitanian trait, and little bit of decrease in liberty desire. In the previous step diary, we showed a screenshot featuring a Portuguese power block named Quinto Imperio, or Fifth Empire. In this case, it was simply what I chose to name my cultural commonwealth to show off the spread of primary culture interaction. The Quinto Imperio refers to the messianic concept of the universal Fifth Empire, most famous for its appearance in Fernando Pessoa's Mensagem. In Pessoa's poem, the first four empires, those established in the past, are Greece, Rome, Christianity, and the amalgamated empires of Europe. The fifth empire is one yet to be established and would be spiritually Portuguese, a universal empire headed by resurrected King Sebastian of Portugal. It is somewhat arrogant to proclaim oneself the Fifth Empire. We got a lot of people proclaiming themselves the X Empire. In the absence of the resurrected King Sebastian, nonetheless, if one manages to restore a union with the Emperor, one will revive King Sebastian from the dead as part of the official flavor of the game. One may be inclined to refer to one's empire in those terms. Yeah. Makes sense. Certainly makes sense. Definitely, that's what that read. The Iberian Union. As pan-nationalism sentiment arose in Italy, Iberia, or Italy, Germany, and the Balkans, so too did it come to Iberia. Whilst pan-Iberianism was never prominent as the aforementioned movements, one may point to several prominent advocates within the state and out. In 1870, the provincial government with pan-Iberian sentiments rallied around elected King Luis of the First of Portugal as the King of Spain, opposed that Luis rejected. His father, Fernando II, would similarly reject this offer. This option, favored by the petite bourgeoisie, portrayed in the Glorious Revolution journal entry showed in 165. These deputies represent the dynastic wing of pan-Iberianism, wishing to establish a shared royal dynasty and customs union between Portugal and Spain. On the Republican sides, both Francesc Pai y Margal and Manuel Ruiz Zorrilla were supporters of pan-Iberianism. The first advocating for a federal union and the latter for a unitary state. In 1885, Zorrilla predicted a republican revolution in Spain and Portugal, shortly followed by unification into a single republic. Though this prediction was somewhat detached from reality, it is useful for understanding the mentality of pan-Iberian republicans. In many cases, 19th century Spanish and Portuguese republicanism retained the messianic outlook that had long been displaced by particularist nationalists among the developed European republican movements. As late as 1890s, Spanish Republican exiles commonly made use of French Emperor Republican calendar, debated electoralism, abstentionism, and anti-electoralism, and considered revolution as a matter of fact. Nonetheless, this was not to last. When a lasting Republican revolution did make its way to Iberia, sweeping away the Braganças in 1910 and the Bourbons in 1931, no particular attempt was made to unify the Portuguese and Spanish republics. As it is typically through history, the realities of state power swiftly drowned out the aspirations of a movement that had hitherto held none. as it happens. The pan-Iberialist attitudes were also common among many communists and syndicalists throughout Iberia. Throughout the 1910s and 20s, the Spanish and Portuguese syndicalist organizations sought to establish an Iberian syndicalist confederation, a project that was stymied by the harsh repressions of the Spanish and Portuguese dictatorships in the 1920s. In 1927, this project was revived in the form of the Iberian Anarchist Federation, FAI, which aimed to unify the Portuguese and Spanish anarchist organizations. The FAI was originally proposed to be headquartered in Portugal. However, this proposition was declined by the Portuguese anarchists themselves, citing a larger number of Spanish militants within the organization. This makes sense. Though the Portuguese anarchists would have further role in the development of the organization, the FAI would always remain overwhelmingly Spanish. Its goal of a pan-Iberian and international revolution remained. When the first Iberian country researches pan-nationalism, she will receive an event that will allow her to pursue the ambition of unifying the peninsula. If a country accepts the ambition, all Iberian countries will receive a follow-up event offering the chance to either express interest in the project or remain separate. If only one country expresses interest in the Iberian project, unification may only be realized through conquest. This makes sense. Every Iberian country that expresses broad interest in unification will become involved in the Iberian Union journal entry. Broad interest, however, does not mean an immediate interest. In order for these countries to properly unify, they must be in a stable position and share a certain number of laws. Ooh, sharing laws is interesting. So you could make you can force, or you can make treaties to ask people to change laws repeatedly in kind of a little bit of a massaging way. If you subjugate people, you can also, well, if you could subjugate previously, you could just click Iberia, but I guess maybe this isn't an option. And so what are the ways you can massage in laws? I think if you pull them into blocks, some of these, you can regime change them if you have the law-oriented block. Stuff like this. The Establish Real Union button may be pressed once all Iberian countries are sufficiently synchronized in the laws and possess good relations with another. Shared governance principles is useful. A monarchist Portugal will never be able to diplomatically unify with an anarchist Spain. This certainly makes some sense. And we see we need to have some kind of requirements. All countries have the same governing principle law, have at least 15 active laws, share at least 15 active laws. Subject countries have liberty desire below 75, has not already used this interaction. A bit interesting. You can also just change your laws to theirs with the idea of changing back. But one may ask, what if we do the unthinkable and play something other than a constitutional monarchy and not an absolute monarchy either? But what would that entail? The community demands the real movement, but you just said the real movement. Okay, fine. The Iberian Union. Show me the real... our movement. Okay, so we do see communist versions of these countries, naturally, hammer and sickle here. The button which allows for the diplomatic unification of the different variants depending on one's governing principles, with two theocracies instead signing a concordant. Two anarchist countries come and consider themselves as shared units within a confederation. In addition to the prior button, the communist and anarchist iterations of the journal entry permit for the creation of a new culture for the federation to be. If the date is 1890, the historical invention of the Esperanto language, one is playing the Council Republic, and either side has cultural exclusion or multiculturalism. One may recognize Esperanto language as the official language of the Federation. All men are brothers. True enough. Okay. And we see become exclusive primary culture of Iberia for Iberian. Depending on the choice one makes in the event, one will either gain a new Iberian culture or instate the Iberian culture as exclusively primary culture of Iberia. In this case, we have opted for the latter, and we see the exclusive primary culture. All non-Iberian cultures will stop being primary cultures. Okay, and then 1% of all Iberian pops will assimilate. And all state regions in Iberia will become Iberian homelands. I wonder if that will delete the homelands of the other ones, and then we will see a bunch of people assimilate. Upon forming Iberia, a certain portion of one's pops will adopt the Iberian culture. The Iberian culture has the Iberian group heritage trait and the Esperanto language trait, with Esperanto being placed within the Romance language group. So this is pretty cool. We have kind of a unified Iberia journal entry thing, which you could play as either Spain or Portugal, but it's been included in Portugal's favor. As a finishing touch, if one chooses to make the Iberian culture exclusive primary culture of the Federation, all states and cities in Iberia will adopt Esperanto names. We have also added many new flags and map colors for Iberia. If one unifies Iberia as a liberal republic, one will be able to choose between 3 possible flags in the unification event. The flag of the Union, the tricolor, the federal flag. Okay, cool. We have also been inspired by Paradox Tinto's extremely visionary flag system. So I got a lot of flags. If one forms monarchist Iberia, one's flag will change depending on one's ruling dynasty with custom, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that word. I didn't know your game, girl. I don't know that word. What is that? I'll have to look that up later. For every royal family in the Glorious Revolution journal entry. I'm not going to even try and pronounce it because I don't even know what it means anyways. So we do see different versions of the or slightly different versions of the crest, the familiar crest, and that is all. Thank you for reading. Next Monday, we will cover update 1.12 and Iberian Twilight's narrative content, as well as the changes we have made to the map. And then also next week on Thursday, we will visit a team to tour us through the art of Iberian Twilight, and of course, we will wish you a happy Thursday with capitalized H, because as one knows, it is indeed a holiday. So that is the rather long dev diary. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, etc. And other than that, have a good one. Bye-bye now.